The topic this week is depth of field. While strictly not a compositional element, it can be used to create better composition. The subject is a little technical. It requires you to know a bit about your camera and your lens. So be patient trying this out, but the more you try, the easier the concept and the technical aspects will get.
Simply put, depth of field is the distance in front of and behind the subject which appears to be in focus. Technically, there is only one distance at which a subject is truly in focus for a given setup. But because the focus falls off gradually, there is still a region extending in front of and behind the true focus distance that appears to be sharp. This region is the depth of field. Anything that is within this region will appear as sharp and in focus, and anything outside of this region will appear as out of focus. Notice that the back portion of the depth of field is larger than the front. The difference between these two portions changes depending on the setup, but in every case, the back portion is larger.
Depth of field then is a range of acceptable focus in front of and behind the sharpest point of focus. That's also known as the focal plane or the focal distance. The range extends more behind the focal distance than in front of the focal distance. Since it's a range of acceptable focus, it can either be a wide range or a narrow range. You can see that only some of these place settings are in focus. Others closer and further away are not in focus. The range of acceptable focus is the depth of field. A wide range is called a deep depth of field. It means that more things in your image will be in focus. You can see in this example that even very close to the lens, the rocks are in focus. And everything behind the car, even up to the wall, is in focus as well. This is a very deep depth of field. But in this image, very little in front of the model and nothing behind her is in focus. We call this a shallow depth of field. Which one you want is up to you, as the one making the images. It will depend on if you want to isolate the viewer's attention on the subject, as in this picture, where this one kid who's in focus is clearly the subject. You can also use this to enhance other depth elements in your image. It can be used to draw attention to objects on other planes of depth by having them in focus as well as the main subject. Or you can soften the focus on things in the foreground or background of your subject. This will ease the distraction of those things without removing them from the frame. Thus this image still has planes of depth, but the subject is clearly in focus. You can control how deep your depth of field is. It is affected by three things that you change for every shot: your aperture or iris, and don't forget that as the aperture gets bigger, the f-stop number actually gets smaller, your focal length, or the amount of zoom you use, and the distance to your subject.